மேடையில் இருக்கும் பெரியோர்களுக்கும் உங்கள் அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். ஆங்கிலத்தில் பேசப்போகிறேன், மன்னிக்கவும். This day of remembrance is an occasion for deep sadness as well as for celebration. Sadness over the loss of one so loved by not just the legion of his friends and admirers, but also by the targets of his satire. And celebration of a life so well lived, so full of achievement, so selfless in giving and sharing. It is difficult for any one person to encompass Cho in his mind or words, and indeed, no amount of words would suffice to capture his unique genius. Nevertheless, I stand before you to pay my tribute in the place of my brother Ram, who is unavoidably held up in Colombo. I had known Cho for over 5 decades, first from a distance as part of the audience at his plays. I distinctly remember Quo Vadis, Why Not, and Mahabhat bin Thuglak, among others, that I enjoyed tremendously. Then I came to know him in person as a senior and respected colleague in the media and as a social and political activist. In all these years, my admiration continued to increase with each passing day. There are many facets of Cho that many have touched upon. Let me just focus on Cho as a fearless, uncompromising champion of free speech. In this area of free speech, he was both a practitioner par excellence and an uncompromising advocate and defender of the freedom of others. Armed with his training as a lawyer who knew how far his liberty extended, and with his disdain for overbearing authority, he pushed the limits of free speech to its farthest extent. His ideas, speeches, and writing were honed first in a scintillating plays that most of us are familiar with, laced with sarcasm, wit, and humor. He drew memorable sketches of politicians, policemen, lawyers, ordinary men and women. He mocked those who took themselves too seriously, exposed the devious ways of politicians, had little respect for pretentious authority, and excoriated the corrupt. As important as the content of his writings was the way he went about saying things. His barbs were no doubt sharp, yet the way they were worded and his wit and humor were such that even the targets of his criticism admired the writings and occasionally laughed at themselves as well. He was forthright and spoke his mind, but there was no rancor or malice or any sign of bitterness. The fact that he did not take himself too seriously and could laugh at himself and the situations that he was at times placed in made the writings all the more acceptable. I remember him narrating a story of how on a plane trip to Delhi, he sat by the side of the governor of a southern state and mistook him for a flute artist and kept talking to him about Carnatic music and flute playing all the while without realizing who he was. Only when he landed in Delhi did he know that he was a governor because of the protocol. If he had any wish, he would certainly have liked to see Sri Gurumurthy succeed him as editor of Thuglak, which is what he urged Sri Gurumurthy to do even in his lifetime. A worthy successor indeed to a man whose life was the stuff of legend. As a political commentator, Cho's views were clear and open, and he was an equal opportunity critic of all manner of politicians. Many of the top politicians were his personal friends, yet he spared no one and would be sharply critical of any of them if they deviated from ethical norms. Among politicians, he had no permanent friends or permanent enemies, but I dare say only permanent admirers. Quite apart from his own writings, he was a fierce and uncompromising defender of the right to free speech for all, even if he disagreed with their views. And of course, he stood steadfast with friends. I was myself a recipient of his vigorous support in the cause of free speech. When in 2003, the Tamil Nadu Assembly sentenced 4 of my colleagues and me to 2 weeks in prison for an editorial and reports on the functioning of the Assembly and on the muzzling of the opposition, Cho stood on the front lines of the protest, addressing a press conference. In the press conference, he urged newspaper editors to republish the offending editorial with the title Rising Intolerance in their publications and dared the Assembly to act against them, and followed it up himself in Thuglak. It is a different matter that the Supreme Court stayed the Assembly's order and the Assembly itself later rescinded it. A well-known writer of a self-help book suggests that a person who wants to plan his life should start in the end, imagining what he would like his family, his friends, and his colleagues to say about him at his funeral, and live in a way that meets those wishes. Even without such mental exercises, Cho lived a life that fits perfectly into the ideal that we celebrate today. In his life, in his work and writings, and in his activism for the right values, Cho was unique, and we will certainly not see another like him in our lifetimes.